Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk. Time for the show. Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. So welcome back to Once a DJ. We're here today with a man who I was trying to think how to describe, but I would kind of just say like a hip-hop man about town. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but Dan Greenpeace, what do you think?
Legend, hip-hop legend.
Yeah, that works.
No, I mean, call me a man about town. Look, people make their own mind up by the end of it anyway, so.
You just know a lot of people. That's kind of where I'm going with that.
Certainly know a lot of people, yeah. That much is true.
Now, a couple of things before we kind of get into it. One thing is, where did the name come from? Because I always forget to ask people once we get into the flow of it.
Oh, excuse the self-promotion on the T-shirt as well. But, where did the name come from? Well, yes, very simple. I grew up in Leeds, and probably about 1986, 1987, we were all kind of like, we'd go down to 4-Star General in London on Carnaby Street and buy hip-hop gear that was kind of imported in from New York. And I got hold of a pair of like green Adidas, I think they're called Top 10 highs. And I had this green Adidas tracksuit, so I was walking around Leeds City Centre in full green, and someone just said, "Oh, it's Greenpeace," and I became DJ Greenpeace. The Dan Greenpeace came in quite a few years later, because then I was writing for a lot of magazines, and they would credit me as DJ Greenpeace if I wrote reviews. And then a lady, I can't remember, it was Herb magazine, I think, in LA, and she just sort of basically put me down as Dan Greenpeace rather than DJ Greenpeace, and then that was it. It became Dan Greenpeace just because she kind of just knew me as Dan and Greenpeace, and that was that. Yeah, a long way around of a long way of telling you. It's summed up in about 20 seconds.
And the other thing just to flag is my kind of knowledge of you is that let me reword that. When people have talked to me about you, you're one of those people where people will be like, "Oh, Dan's got a lot of stories." So if we're talking about something and you realise there's an amazing story that I've not kind of managed to pull out of you, just if we need to just kind of stop everything and divert, then please just go for it. So yeah, that's a great introduction there to you. And so what I tend to do is just go into timeline with people, really. So how did hip hop first come into your life in Leeds? I'm particularly interested as I'm Wakefield born. So I grew up not too far away from there, but in a village where there was none of this sort of stuff. So it'd be great to hear.
How did I get into hip hop? I got into hip hop. Well, I mean, look, give you some context. I'm 53 years old, right? So my lifetime has pretty much tracked the progress of hip hop since the early days. I wasn't at the New York Bronx jams, in the late 70s, but by the time I was 11 years old, 12 years old, and forming my own sort of musical tastes, the early kind of hip hop was floating around, whether it's Sugar Hill Gang or the early electro records or whatever it may be. So it was just kind of part of the evolution of pop music, I guess. I started off listening to Adam and the Ants when I was young. My cousins were into The Clash and Sex Pistols. So there's this kind of like intersection of punk, rock meets, Malcolm McLaren that was going on in sort of New York, and that sort of like, through the music press and through, the very few bits of hip hop that was on TV, we started becoming aware of this art form, right? And I was old enough, I was at that age where I was kind of forming my own musical tastes. And, I knew what I was into. I was into BMXing. So BMXing, breakdancing, hip hop, graffiti, that whole culture was just new and exciting. And that was kind of the previous generation. My cousins were like, Clash and Sex Pistols. And the next step was, Adam and the Ants for me was the kind of like the connector. So Adam on his, I think his second album, we had a track called Ant Rap in 1981. And clearly he was going back and forth from America and being exposed to this kind of hip hop culture. And I was listening to Adam and the Ants and Ant Rap. I'm like, wow, what the hell's rap? But then I start seeing it on TV and it all came at that time. It was all so new. It was just happening. It wasn't really called hip hop or rap or whatever. It was just what we were seeing. And it just captured my imagination. And I just thought it was incredible. And whereas, my older cousins were into the Clash, that was their thing. And hip hop was my thing, and it was just like, that sort of next step, next logical step.
Yeah. So how accessible was hip hop in Leeds? As a culture, not even necessarily just records.
My earliest memories of any kind of culture were probably around 82, 83. Like the electro compilations had come out. There was local youth clubs. I remember there was one dance studio, sounds a bit bougie, but there was one dance studio which close to where I lived. They were offering breakdance lessons, and this must have been 82, 83. But in terms of, you wouldn't see it in clubs, you wouldn't see it on the streets until maybe a year or two later. But then, 83, 84, it was a thing. There was an explosion, and people were breakdancing. Me and my brothers had lino. We'd go to these kind of like youth club events where people were breakdancing. There was local places offering breakdancing lessons. So in terms of the culture, I think probably breakdancing was the first thing I was exposed to. Visually, the odd track would come up on top of the pops, like Dougie Fresh and the Get Fresh crew, with 1984, maybe 1985. And then you'd see the odd documentary, and there'd be an odd segment in news or on Blue Peter where you'd see, oh, that's that thing that we're doing and it's on TV. It was so rare to see the culture anywhere in the street. Leeds was a relatively big city, but I think if I grew up in London, it would have been a lot different. But you're asking the question about Leeds, so that I'm answering the question. But there wasn't much, but the little bits that you could grab onto were like so precious. And you'd record off TV, news segments, and then people would pass tapes around and someone recorded it and I missed it. And then, now it's so prevalent and the culture is so in your face and on your phone and right under your nose. Back then it was so rare to get a glimpse of anything. And so you really held on to that moment when you did.
Yeah. So when did DJing come in for you then?
DJing probably came in, look, my parents always had vinyl. There was always a record player. It was a pretty... for the time, it was a pretty high-end record player. My dad had a pretty high-end tape deck and amplifier, and there was always vinyl. My mum was into sort of like blues and soul, so there'd be like Booker T and the MGs, 21st Century. I can't remember the name of the band. They did that, Heaven on Hellbreak. I can't remember the name of the band, but that was in a collection. My dad had Wings and Beatles, so Mum was very much, black music influenced, and my dad was very much sort of like, the kind of pop at the time, ABBA, Beatles, Wings, that kind of thing. So it was a real mishmash, but there was always a chunk of vinyl. There's a lot of vinyl behind me, but there was always 100 records, vinyl records, and I was always like playing through those, and I'd do pause mixtapes. So because the tape deck was quite high end, I would, I don't know if you've anyone on your podcasts or on these podcasts have mentioned pause mixtapes, but you would basically, it had a very accurate pause button. So if I was playing a record, I can probably capture the break and do a relatively decent loop on just a 90-minute cassette and like repeat drum breaks or samples or guitar licks or whatever it would be. So I'd do like these pause mix loops.
Yeah.
I know it's a thing. I know I wasn't the only one, but at that time I thought I was the only person in the world doing that. I literally thought I'm the only person on the planet who's put a needle on a record, found a little loop or a sample, and I've looped it using this tape deck because you don't know anyone else is doing it. Years and years later, I'm listening to producers and DJs who are around my age saying they did the same thing. And I'm like, but you never would have known at that time. So for making these like pause mix loops on this very accurate cassette deck I had, I remember it's like this, push the button, it was like incredibly accurate. You could catch it with a millisecond. So you could loop things quite effectively. And then it was just like, there's always vinyl. I was making these loops. I was like discovering stuff myself. No one was telling me what to do. There was no instruction manual. There's no YouTube. I just discovered it. But to answer your question, starting DJing seriously was probably when I started getting to pirate radio about 1986, 1987. So there was a station in Leeds called Lethal FM. There was a number. There was Lethal FM. There was Paradise City Radio in Bradford. There was there was a number of stations that were popping up, all run by sort of dodgy fellas who were dealing drugs and just like getting money by any means. But you had to they had to buy a transmitter. They needed Technics turntables. They needed a mixer. They needed mics. They needed a studio. So it was always a kind of like in abandoned or like council flats, high rises in Leeds city centre. Or I'd used to get the train over to Bradford. And I was collecting records by that point. So by that point, there was like Jumbo Records in Leeds and Crash Records in Leeds, and I'd be collecting avidly vinyl, and going in secondhand shops, getting the train over to Manchester and buying records there as well. So this was probably 85, 86. Before then, I was only like consuming records that I'd heard on the electro compilations. So on the electro compilations, like the Aleem Brothers or Imperial Brothers or Hashim, Fresh 3 MCs or whatever it may be, they were on these comps. When I started to make a little bit of money, I had a job at a local cinema and I'd make a bit of cash and I'd go straight to Crash Records or Jumbo or whatever it was at the time. And I'd try and seek those 12 inches out. So off the electro albums, that's my favorite one. I've only got a few quid, I'll buy that 12 inch. And it was an import 12 inch. So at that time they were like £4 or £5 each. It's quite a lot of money. And gradually I've sort of built up a collection really, and then started doing pirate radio, and I had a sort of small collection of music to play, and I'd start mixing it together. I didn't have decks at home at that point, but I'd sort of start mixing records today live on radio. So it was radio that really got me into the DJ.
Right, so that actually gave you an opportunity to practice.
Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah, my practice time was live on radio. And honestly, that continued for many, many years when I was on XFM. The only time I really practiced was when I mainly play vinyl, and unless I was sort of playing exclusives or CD or DAT or whatever. But yeah, my practice session really was when I was doing radio, and even when I was on XFM for almost a decade, that live mixing experience. And of course, then I was DJing in clubs a lot and doing various events.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a bit. Just on the pirate radio then, something I've not thought about until you mentioned it then, like the level of investment, the shady guys that are funding it and stuff. If you're a dealer in Leeds, what's your impetus for setting up a pirate radio station? Is it monetizable?
No, I think they couldn't sell ads really. I mean, they probably had the local chip shop who maybe wanted to, advertise, and there might be a few quid. I've got a picture here actually. This is funny. I keep this as inspiration. I'll give you a bit of a story. So have you heard of Tessa Sanderson, the athlete? Yeah, right. So this is Tessa Sanderson, and I didn't put this here on purpose. I have it there as inspiration. So basically, Tessa Sanderson had a shop in Leeds, and it sold like high-end Fila, Sergio Tacchini, LS tracksuits, right? And it was pretty much in the neighborhood where we lived in Moortown in Leeds. And the reason why I put that picture there is because if it wasn't for that store, Tessa Sanderson's World, or Leisure World it was called, I probably wouldn't be the pirate radio DJ. So basically, I'll give you one story behind the pirate radio. I won't name his name, but the guy who ran the station basically decided to throw a metal bin through the window and raid the entire store one night of all the high-end tennis gear that was in there, and sold it all and made a bit of money and set up the station from the money he made from raiding Tessa Sanderson's store.
Bloody hell.
So I hope she doesn't hear this, and I hope this doesn't get back to her. But,
I can't imagine Tessa Sanderson's listening.
because the photo of her in front of that store, it was from a newspaper clipping when she got robbed, and it was in the local Yorkshire Evening Post. Tessa Sanderson's store gets burgled or robbed or whatever. So that's the reason that photo is taken from a local newspaper article where she's being interviewed. I think by this point he may have ransacked the store maybe 2 or 3 times.
No.
So the whole reason why that station was set up is because he literally raided the store. He also then burgled a few houses, took a few savings account bank books on those houses, and was like going into the branch and taking money out. So later on in life, I found out, victim of serious drug abuse and, all sorts of kind of issues that come along with that. So he ended up being institutionalized. But that's how that particular pirate radio station started that I started on. So, that's a bit of a story about how that came about.
Yeah, I just can't imagine why you'd do a job like that and then think, well, what am I going to do with this money? I'm going to invest
there was a love of music, it was all born from a love of music. Pirate radio was a thing. I used to DJ on this station called Paradise City Radio. I'd get the train to Bradford from Leeds, was a bit of a trek. And, I'd go into that house, probably 16, 17 years old. It was clearly like a drug den, like a crack den or whatever it was. I'd go three flights of stairs up to where the studio was. But I'd come downstairs and it'd be like a load of dudes smoking, injecting, God, you name it. It didn't even faze me. I just like, oh, all right, guys, I'm going to do my radio show. Go up 3 flights of stairs, come back down 3 hours later, get back on the train back to Leeds. Job done. All I wanted to do was share music. All I wanted to do was play music, practice, have a set of decks to DJ on, share the music I had, and get that interaction from the crowd as well. Because people would call into the studio on a rotary phone, just you give people shout outs, whatever. It was very basic, very rudimentary. There were great times, but that's kind of where the whole DJing thing and the radio thing came from. It was just a passion for sharing music on stations by either criminals who love music as well, and by whatever means necessary, found the means and the funds to get the equipment to do it. And that radio station that I broadcast on first in Leeds, which is very close to my house, it got raided a couple of times. I'd take all my records in there, maybe had a couple hundred records. The police would come raid it. All my records would get taken, the equipment would get taken. But then after 6 months, you could go back in and sort of request for them to return. So some of the records would go back, some of the equipment got returned, sometimes it got confiscated and you never saw it again. But there was a cycle of this for 2 or 3 years in those early days,
Are there any particular records that you lost that are painful?
I can't really remember, but put it this way, I've always been a collector and had pretty discerning taste. If I was spending my hard-earned money, I didn't buy any bullshit, So it was like early Ultramagnetic MCs or early Electro records or, records on Profile or Tough City or Cold Chilling that I'd got. So that, anything that I lost would have hurt, but nothing that I couldn't buy back later on in life.
Yeah. Was the pirate radio quite a good springboard for going out and DJing in Leeds? Was it quite a good network builder?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there weren't many people doing hip-hop. I was like the hip-hop radio guy. There was a couple of others. It wasn't until I was there was a club called The Warehouse in Leeds, which still exists on Summer Street. And back then, this is probably 87, 88, and the big records were like Don't Scandalize Mine, Sugar Bear, JVC4, Strong Island, Rob Bass and Easy Rock, It Takes Two. And what would happen then is like you'd go to the club, The Warehouse, and there'd be 3-4 DJs in the night. There'd be a hip-hop DJ, which is usually George from Nightmares on Wax, DJ Ease. You should get him on the podcast as well if you haven't already. So you got DJ Ease, then you got DJ Kevin, who was the other guy he was the other half of Nightmares on Wax, and he was the house DJ. Then you got this guy DJ Roy, who was the soul and funk DJ. And what would happen is the DJs would come on and do an hour each, and the hip hop guys, when George was DJing the hip hop guys would go on, jump on, do the Running Man, listen to those kind of hits. Then the house guy would come on, and the house, guys and girls would go on and dance to the house music, and the hip hop guys would step aside. So every musical genre was in that club at the time, but it was almost like segmented by slots. So it wasn't just a hip hop club or a house club or a soul club. Everything was in one place, and it would rotate. So you'd get a real mishmash of like music fans in one place and one time, and they'd get their chance at the dance floor and enjoy that DJ. And then it would rotate, and that's kind of how it was for a long time. So George was always like a year or so ahead of me in terms of DJing. He didn't do pirate radio, but George Nightmares of Wax was kind of the hip hop DJ. And then he probably about, when I was about 17, 18, I got my first sort of local gigs. He put me on with some of his gigs, and I'd find my own little gigs and I'd do private parties. And then by about 18, I was sort of, getting opportunities to DJ in clubs, and I'd have a pretty good record collection by then. So I knew I could sort of do a good 2-hour set and keep it moving.
Once a DJ is brought to you with the support of Vinyl Underground Record Store. Since 1993, VU has been shipping new and used underground house, techno, disco, hip-hop, soul and more worldwide from Northampton in the UK. They're your go-to store for upfront releases, repressed classics and deep digging for undiscovered gems. And they're a great crew to deal with who really care about the music and their customers. To show the support to the Once a DJ community, they're giving you 10% off your next order. Just head to vinylunderground.co.uk and use the code ONCEADJ10 at checkout. You also get free UK delivery on all orders over £100. That's ONCEADJ10 at vinylunderground.co.uk. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on, so I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com, and if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. Yeah. So, we've all read Andrew Emery's books.
Who? Sorry, who's that? And you had him on your podcast. For the record, he was never a DJ.
No, but
he was my rapper.
He's close enough to the culture. Don't make it harder for me to get DJ star. I'm struggling already.
Pulling love Andrew, my oldest friend. So
yeah. So, what's your sort of memory and viewpoint on that era and working on? Because you guys did an album, right?
Yeah, we did a lot. We had a group called Prehistoric Ages. There was me, Drew, Countdown, and then adjacent to that there was like New Flesh for Old in York. And then there was a load of local guys. So yeah, look, we did a load of demos. I was the producer, he was the rapper, DJ Countdown was the DJ, he did the scratches. We did so much. We not an album, but we did countless demos. We went from being called Progressive Agenda, then DJ Countdown left. We wanted to keep the PA letters. So me and Andrew, had an all-nighter at his house listening to old, hip-hop records, him farting constantly. It was like torture. By the end of it, we kind of gone through the dictionary and we came up with the name Progressive Agenda. So that was kind of, that's probably what you read about in the book, mainly Progressive Agenda. And that was our group. We were terrible live. I did the beats. Sometimes I'd rap. I'd always fluff my lines. It was woeful. It really was absolutely woeful. But it was the best times. We had the best times. So. My memories of those times were glorious, and it's amazing when, Drew wrote that first book, Wiggers, the memories that came back, the photos we unearthed, it was amazing. It was almost like, reading your life story, back again. Half the stuff I forgot. It was amazing when he wrote the book, and then for other people to read it and relate to it. And I saw a YouTube video a couple of weeks ago I can't remember, some guys did a YouTube video about being in a 90s rap group. I can't remember the name of it. It's online somewhere, and it was almost like the video version of that book. And I sent it to Drew, and he's like, "Oh shit, that's the idea of my TV show gone then." But even seeing that video, it's like, it all came back so vividly. But yeah, the happiest of times, happiest of memories. And and the launchpad for his journalistic career and my DJ radio and concert promoting career, it all came from that moment.
So in what way then? How did that lead on to further opportunities?
Well, when we did that, he got a number of jobs. I just had a career. Honestly, we didn't go straight into the music business. I didn't become a full-time DJ. I had a pretty regular career. We did my A-levels and then went to university.
What did you study?
Business. And I had at Bradford University, and then I went on to do a number of jobs. Worked for some big corporates. I had some sort of I was I could have gone that corporate way, or I could have gone the music way. I almost kind of regret, not having the guts to sort of go straight into music. But I think living in Leeds, even though there were opportunities, it wasn't in your face as living in London or one of the bigger cities. So I think I sort of chose the corporate route, and then didn't really find my feet and get the confidence or get the opportunities to then go into the full-time the music side until a bit later on. So it probably wasn't until honestly until I was 30 or 29, 30 that I got the gig on XFM, because I moved down to London with work. So I moved to London with my job in like 97. And then obviously was exposed to way more than I was in Leeds, a music industry. I was going to we were like, on street teams for major record labels like Sony. We'd be DJing clubs, we'd be going to clubs. It was just so vibrant. But I think my progress was stilted a little bit, still being in Leeds until, until the age of about 26, 27. I probably missed out on a lot that I could have done if I'd have been in London. So a lot of my friends who grew up in London and peers now and colleagues had that extra 6-7 years that I did, and they were full-time record producers and really accomplished DJs and doing incredibly well. And I think I missed that little window. So when I finally got into it, I had to play catch up a bit.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, that I guess the big opportunity for me came being a journalist. Drew had a day job in Leeds. He was always an aspiring journalist. You've read his follow-up book, Right Lines, and he was the one that sent off his writing to Andy Cowan at Hip Hop Connection, and so he was always like writing feature pieces and interviews, things like that. I had the idea of doing this column called Independence Day, where I'd kind of like write and review independent rap records, probably sort of like 95, 96, around about that time. So he was writing the features, I was writing the column. So I was connecting with record labels and people like Peanut Butter Wolf and Madlib and, all those kind of like, and the Raucous Records and Bobito and Stretch Armstrong. I was connected with all those guys through writing my Independence Day column. So, and some of these guys are friends to this day, and I've worked with this to this day and stayed in contact with, which is incredible. But I think, being a journalist, being in Leeds, I wasn't exposed to the clubs as much. I wasn't exposed to the radio at a higher level. I wasn't exposed to being, taking my production skills or DJ skills to the next level. So in the interim, I became a pretty well-known sort of journalist and contributed to Hip Hop Connection and a number of other magazines, as did Drew. So we kind of both progressed. And then it wasn't when I moved to London, then I was exposed to more DJing and radio opportunities. And that's when it kind of flourished. So the journalism was the interim. And we did Fat Lace magazine from Leeds as well. So, we started Fat Lace magazine when we're still living in Leeds. And so I said the journalism side was probably my first foray into the music industry, so to speak.
I think it can be hard as well with what you were saying about like the people that go into music full time straight off, because I think in our society as well, you have the kind of safe corporate options with things. There's I not in the same way, but there's things where I kind of went for the safe options because it's almost like, well, this is what I think my parents would probably think I should do, and you get a lot of influence from that, even though they're not hard forced it. Like when I started DJing, my mum, the first thing she'd say is, "Are you starting getting paid for this or what?" And in the end, when you start getting paid, you're like, I'm getting a better hourly than I would do in the safe job. But also I think with it, and I'm interested to know if you agree or not. I feel like there's just things you can learn in the corporate world that can help you either in, say, the music world, or it can help you tie the two together, and you can kind of exist in a world where you kind of operate a little bit in both.
That's a really good point, Adam, actually. And that aspect where you get the best of both worlds is now benefiting me where I am now in life and in my career and in business. Because I did have that kind of corporate training, so to speak. I worked for big organizations. I traveled a bit with those organizations, on proper business trips, and now, I'm still DJing, I'm still collecting. I love hip hop, I love music. I don't do radio anymore. but I'm a concert promoter. I'm a Middle East-based concert promoter running a business that was acquired by Sony Music 2 years ago. And so even that whole to go full circle from me being on the Sony Street team in the mid-90s, working on Nas's album and Fuji's album, then suddenly to have my company partially acquired by Sony decades later, and then being sort of like, you know, having run my own business for many years on my own with my business partner on a very sort of independent level, but then being sucked into a corporation, I you know, those skills that I learned in those early days and allowed me to navigate in that corporate setting now, you know, so it wasn't entirely wasted, and I don't regret it. At the time, I was like, oh damn, you know, my friends are like full-time music producers, killing it, traveling around the world, and I've kind of missed the boat a little bit. But you know, yeah, everyone has their own path. But yeah, to answer your question and to come back to your point, it's a very, very good point. Yes, it has benefited me. I don't regret it, and then later on in life, I've realized how valuable those early lessons I learned were.
Yeah, and I guess that even with something where your business has been acquired or partially acquired, whichever it is, if you've not had the corporate experience, you could go one of two ways with it. It could make you feel really insecure about your position in the company, or it could make you really sort of a bit too carefree, thinking, well, we've got their money now. So, you know, it probably gives you a bit more of a measured perspective on it.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are complexities to it into the way the deal was structured, and you know, but in a way, yes, I can maneuver in that environment. You know, I can probably do a lot that my peers who went on to be full-time music producers could not imagine doing. And that was just my path, you know. But yeah, the main thing is that I've never lost touch of the music. I've never stopped DJing. I never stopped collecting. I've never stopped my passion for the music and the music form. I'm always learning, and as you get older, a bit older, and you know, and you go through these kind of business phases, and I moved country. I moved to the Middle East and moved to Dubai like 10 years ago. I've got a family, and I'm in a totally different phase of life, but there's been one constant, which is the music, the DJing, the love of the culture. I've even got back into producing last year or the last couple of years, you know, and I didn't use a sampler since 1991, 92, 93. And then literally 30 years later, you know, it's the pandemic, and I'm messing around with Ableton, and I'm like, you know what, I've got all these records. I've even been buying breaks all these years and samples and digging for interesting records, and I live in an interesting part of the world where I travel around the region. I'm picking up interesting records, and I'm exposed to Indian music and Lebanese music and Asian music, and then it's time to put it to use. And then, you know, I put my first single out in 2023 with Diamond, and I'm like, I could never have even imagined doing that. And like, you know, talk about a late developer. Put my first record out, you know, in 2023. But it just shows you, like, you know, life takes you in different directions, and everyone has their own path, and you just gotta see it as, you know, if you're looking for that instant success and gratification, sometimes you've got to run the test of time and see where life takes you.
Yeah. So something that's probably one of the reasons I started this, and my kind of interest in the human experience, a big thing is around like getting older, because I certainly feel in the last couple of years my back's telling me I'm getting older, my hips are, but like you get people who seem to, it's like some of us like stay connected with the things that make us feel young, and some people just, particularly say if they get into the corporate world, like a high stress job, it just falls by the wayside, and they don't kind of have these things. But I think there's something so nice, even if you'd not kind of sort of started producing again, just having that thing that is so true to your heart. It keeps you young in spirit.
It does, you know, hip hop specifically. I'm sure music generally does, but being involved with hip hop is a youth culture. You know, hip hop is it came from the streets. It came from a young demographic, and you know, it's morphed and changed and gone worldwide and become a whole different thing, but it has kept me young. And I'm incredibly lucky, you know, you make your own luck, I know, but I'm incredibly grateful for the way, the twists and turns in my life, the opportunities I've had, you know, the people I've met, the people I've worked with, I'm grateful for everything. Honestly, I've done some incredible things. I look back and go, wow, I've lived the hip hop dream. I really have. Whatever I dreamt about, I did business at university, and I dreamt of owning a business. I've got a business. I dreamt of being a DJ. I became a DJ. I fell in love with radio. I was on radio at the highest possible level. When I was on XFM, every week I would count my blessings. I'd be like, if it stops tomorrow, I've done my thing. I live my dream. I'm broadcasting out of Leicester Square Studios at XFM, Capital Radio building, overlooking Leicester Square, interviewing 50 Cent or DJ Premier. It's like wow. This really happened. A lot of pinch myself moments. I was very, very grateful, and I still am very, very grateful. And when it came to an end, when XFM came to a stop, and all good things come to an end, but they changed the format of the programming, they automated a lot of the programming, they got rid of a lot of the specialist shows. I was devastated. I was honestly, I remember my last show, and there's a lot of close friends of mine in that studio. I was utterly devastated. I'm like, why don't I go to One Extra sooner? Why didn't I sort of switch to the BBC? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And it took me, then I went into managing artists and moving away from radio. But my life went into a whole different direction then. But still, I look back at that and go, well, that was the end of that chapter, beginning of another chapter. But only when you look back in life with the benefit of, the ripe old age I am now, it was all meant to happen. And I realized it happened for a reason. At the time, I was distraught. But, it forced me to go into a different direction.
Yeah. How did XFM come about?
XFM came about, I was in London. I moved to London in 97. I was sort of milling around. I was DJing. I was doing clubs more. I was DJing at Fabric. I was doing this, that, and the other. Maybe Fabric wasn't around at that early stages, but I was DJing a lot. I was consulting for a record label called Wall of Sound. If you remember Wall of Sound. They had a label called Bad Magic, which is like a hip-hop imprint. Yeah. And Theo Keating, aka DJ Touche, aka Fake Blood, as he's known now. He was an artist. He was the Wise Guys on Wall of Sound.
Yeah.
And I had started on radio. So I was in London. I just started on radio. I tell you what I was doing. I was still doing a lot of writing, and I was going to a lot of PR companies and meeting a lot of people. I was interviewing a lot of artists, and one of the pluggers for Wall of Sound met me at one of the PR companies called Darling Department, and Ian was one of the pluggers, and said to me, hey, Theo's, thinking of starting a record label, an imprint, a Wall of Sound called Bad Magic, and why don't you come and meet him? So I went to meet Theo, we got on really well, and he's an incredibly talented guy. I mean, from graffiti to DJing to music production, I was one of the most talented people I've met. Incredible creative. And probably one of the people I was talking about where I'm like I wish I could have, I wish I could be him. I wish I could be a full-time creative. But my life took me in different directions. But he's a good example of that, of incredible creative and, just amazing person and very talented. But anyway, so we started talking about the hip-hop label, and he said, look, why don't you go and find some hip-hop artists? So I went to LA, to the B-Boy Summit in LA. I met Ugly Duckling. And I brought their record back, and Ugly Duckling, I think, ended up being the first record we licensed from 1500 Records in LA to be released through Wall of Sound in the UK and Europe, so ex North America, and they were the first group that so I brought them in. We put their Fresh Mode EP out, and then it came onto an album deal, then they signed to Excel and it. Then I did a number of other sort of like one-off deals. I signed one of Cage's first records, 54, produced by DJ Mighty Mai, another amazing creative that I stay in touch with, and I'm even working with. I've been doing a remix for High and Mighty this week, which by the time the podcast airs might actually be out. Again, full circle moments. So I brought in a number of, I was a journalist, but then I was suddenly an A&R. I was suddenly an A&R, and I was bringing in records. I was signing one-off records. I didn't know how to do a deal. I didn't know how to sign a record. I didn't know really much about anything. I signed Black Twang to Bad Magic. Yeah. Black Twang was one of my signing.
Did you sign the creators?
I didn't sign the creators. The creators were always already in the mix,
right?
Through Theo, because Theo was buying records from Julian and Simon.
Yeah.
So Theo discovered the creators, but I certainly then helped them with the album. So I took Evidence and Alchemist and Madlib and the Loop Pack and Craig G and Consequence and all these incredible artists. I was in the studio, so Mos Def, Kweli, in Julian's little studio in Kingston. You know, I was at all those sessions throughout the recording of that whole album.
Right.
You know, weed-filled rooms, like, you know, late nights, Mos Def laying down his vocals. That's how I got a freestyle for one of my first mixtapes is Mos Def and Kweli, and I got them to do like a little freestyle for me. You know, it really kind of, looking back, rock and roll moments. But yeah, so I was involved in that album for sure. I didn't sign them, but I was certainly involved in the A&R. I brought a lot to the album and worked with Julian later on as well, and sort of still stay in touch with him, still buy records from him until recently. So yeah, to answer your question about XFM, so I was very much in the Bad Magic world and the Wall of Sound world. You know, our offices were in Ackland Workshops off Portobello Road. Banksy's studio was in our offices. You know, there was Wall of Sound Records on one side of Ladbroke Grove, of Portobello Road. Ackland Workshops on the other side. Ackland Workshops was where the storeroom was, where all the records and the CDs and vinyl was stored. Banksy's workshop and studio was at the back of that storeroom. So I'd go in, you know, he'd be working there every day, you know, and he even did some design. He did Black Twang's album cover. He designed a load of stuff for Wall of Sound Records. He was just there, he was around, you know. I remember we moved Wall of Sound, we moved offices. We moved into a new office, and he painted those kind of like Happy Chopper helicopters all over the wall, and did a literally entire wall of his artwork. And I remember when we eventually moved out of that office, you know, my friend Alvin, I think, actually filmed him painting, doing the mural. And then when we moved out of the office, I think he filmed Banksy painting over the mural, because the value of the wall would have been more than the office at that time, because he'd achieved some kind of fame. So through being from journalism to working at Wall of Sound, A&Ring for Bad Magic, the plugger that we were working with said to me and Theo, I work with Zane Lowe. Zane Lowe was on XFM at that time. He's a massive hip hop head. He's a big fan of Fat Lace magazine. He loves all the stuff you're doing. Would you be up for meeting him? So he wants to do a hip hop show. So me and Theo went to meet him. I can't remember where we met. Maybe we met at the pub. I can't remember. Anyway, Zane was geeking out, loved Fat Lace, best thing ever, hilarious. All my Kiwi mates love it. He was working part-time in a record shop maybe at the time as well, just started on XFM, was just on MTV. He goes, guys, I want to do a hip-hop show. I'm really busy. I need some guys to do it with. I need some guys to book the artists and buy the records, and I haven't got time for all of it. I need some co-hosts. Do you want to do it? I swear on my life, within 3 days, we were having a meet with Andrew Phillips, who's the head of XFM programming. Within about another week after that, we were on air. You know, it was that quick. And we actually pre-recorded it for the first few months because our schedules were crazy. I think I still had a job at that time. I think I was still doing my day job at that time. Theo was a full-time creative producer, DJ, whatever, and Zane was doing TV and radio. Maybe he'd quit his record store job then as well. But the only way we could get our times aligned was by doing a pre-record. So we'd go in like a Tuesday afternoon, I'd go in my records. But we start to get guests really quickly. I mean, you know, because of my journalism connections and my connection through record labels and DJs. I think Maceo from De La Soul came in and did a guest mix on one of the first shows. Milt D from Audio 2 randomly was in London producing a rock record or a country record, a country artist by, I think Jason Downs, I think his name was. So I heard Milt D was in town, so Milt D came on and did Top Billing live on the show. Pete Rock was just working with BBE Records, and he came in with the UN. He had an album. We had these incredible guests very, very quickly, pre-recording. I remember the first couple of weeks, it was mad. You know, we were doing the radio, and we'd take beers into the studio. And I think one time, we had this big mixing desk. It's like full state-of-the-art, like recording studio at the time. I spilled my beer in the mixing desk, and it just went everywhere in all the faders. And I thought, oh shit, we've been doing this show for like 2 weeks. We're going to get fired. But luckily, the station saw the funny side of it, and we kept our jobs. But very soon after that, Zane got very busy. He was full-time on XFM doing the daily show. Theo was busy with his DJing career. And eventually those two guys just sort of like, look, we can't really commit to it, pre-recording every week. Why don't you just go live and you just do it, Dan? So I just took over the show. And then after about 3 months, I was suddenly then doing it live on a Saturday night, going right up against Westwood, like 9 till 12, you know, at the same time as Westwood. Broadcasting certainly around London and surrounding areas, but you could get XFM nationally as well. And this is before they had the Manchester station. So it just moved really quickly. So at that point, then I was writing for magazines. I was DJing clubs. Wall of Sound were doing these crazy nights at a club called 93 Feet East. Banksy will be outside doing graffiti, design the flyers. You know, we'd have, you know, I'd book the artists for these gigs. I'd bring, you know, I remember DJ Spinbad I brought over, and Paul Nice and all these kind of guys. So I was DJing clubs, and it just suddenly exploded. I was on a major radio station, but I still had a day job. I was getting asked to do crazy things. I remember I got asked to go on Richard and Judy. Yeah, no joke. And I've got the footage. No one will see the footage. I've got it as a digital file. I got it taken from VHS and digitized. I got asked to go on Richard and Judy to talk about street slang. So they were like, right, we need and this was before One Extra. There was only Westwood, me, maybe 279 on Choice. There weren't many radio DJs. There weren't many well-known DJs. So they were like, oh, we need a DJ. All right, the booker for Rich and Judy knows the head of, you know, XFM. Oh, Dan's a hip hop DJ. He'll come and talk about street slang. You know, I don't think they knew who they were booking. They'd never really heard of me. You know, I turn up to Richard and Judy. I'm in the green room with the Nolan sisters and some fucking, I don't know, this lexicographer. I forgot his name, a very accomplished guy. So then I'm live in the studio being interviewed by Richard and Judy talking about street slang and the latest, you know, words on the streets. And they're looking at me like, who the hell's this guy? You know, we don't think we're going to get this like nerdy looking accountant guy, you know, come in the studio. And this because I had this kind of corporate career, and I put my Air Max 95s on, I put a polo sweatshirt on or whatever. But, you know, I was still in very much corporate world, but living this kind of in this parallel universe. It was a very, very strange moment. Anyway, my finance director at that company at the time was at home and saw me live on Richard and Judy, right? And at this point in my office, I was getting records sent to my office in Chiswick, where the company was. I was even getting gold discs at that point, you know, from record labels for the stuff that I was doing. Gold discs were arriving in the office. I'm DJing. I'm out and about. You know, there isn't social media there, but I'm driving around the country in this job. I'm flying around the world with this job. But then my finance director sees me on Rich and Judy and sees me in the office, and they're like, "What exactly were you doing on Richard and Judy yesterday?" And at that point, I was like, okay, I got to move. I got to change careers. I got to move into music full time. I can't do both. The two don't coexist. It's impossible now. I'm kind of too well known in the kind of music scene, and I'm too busy with work. You know, I was flying back from the airport, you know, from doing a job for British Airways, arriving in the airport, changing into my hip hop gear, hip hop t-shirt, hoodie, trainers, going to interview people. It was like Clark Kent, you know? I was like Superman, into the phone booth, changing from suit into, you know, my hip hop gear. And it just got too much. It was crazy. And it actually culminated in me DJing. I was DJing in Liverpool at a club called an event called No Faking, and me and Yoda were living together actually in Chiswick at the time in a flat. I was working in Chiswick, and we were housemates. And I went to DJ in Liverpool, and after I DJ'd, he stayed in a hotel. I went back to Leeds for personal reasons, and I crashed my car on the M62 or whatever it was, leaving the club at 3 o'clock in the morning from Liverpool, driving back to Leeds, and I had my company car. It was an Audi A3 Turbo, whatever it was. Anyway, all Yoda's records were in the back of my car. All my records were in the back car. We were playing on vinyl then. I got paid maybe 300 quid in cash. I was whizzing back to Leeds. I was living in London then, but because I was DJing in Liverpool, I had to go back to Leeds, you know, see some friends and family. Crashed my car, spun out, fell asleep at the wheel, got hit by a truck. You know, I saw my life flash before my very eyes. I still had this job at the time. When the police got to me, I was sparkoed. There was a truck embedded in the side of my car. They had to pull the passenger seat door off the car. I'm like saying to the ambulance guy, I can't really see. I think I've gone blind. And he squirted some sort of saline lotion in my eyes. I'm like, oh, that's bad, I can see now. But my head had gone through the window. The car was covered in blood and cash because I put the cash that had been paid in the cup holder in the car. And so the impact of the accident, of me hitting the barrier, then the truck hitting me, the car was just covered in my blood and cash all over the place. And I said to the policeman, I wasn't drinking. I hadn't taken drugs. I'm a DJ. I got paid in cash. So that's the right. But it looked like a crime scene, you know.
Make a good album cover.
Yeah, my brother actually. This is before phones, camera phones. But my brother went to pick my car up because I was in hospital with severe whiplash. I broke my collarbone and I had glass in my face, and I had an operation to have all this glass removed out of my face. My brother went to pick the car up and he took these kind of Polaroids of my car, and it was destroyed. The inside was covered in blood. The airbag had gone off. He had to get all the Yoda's records out of the car, all my records out of the car, taking them back to Leeds. The whole thing was an utter disaster, but it was just like, all right, shit's got to change. Like, shit has got to change. I can't be doing this.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying Once a DJ. I wanted to create a product for the listeners to be able to support the show and for the guests as a token of gratitude for being on. So I've teamed up with Sure Shot Shop to create some Once a DJ 45 RPM adapter clamps. These are my weapon of choice as a 45 adapter, as they add stability and grip to aid you in any setup. These are available for £25 each plus flat fee postage from onceadj.bigcartel.com. And if you'd like to see the other models you can buy and also customise, check out sureshotshop.com. If you're an avid collector of timeless music on vinyl but don't have the budget to fork out for those pricey originals, then look no further than Be With Records. From library music to yacht rock, jazz, hip hop, disco and beyond, Be With lovingly reissue some of the coolest classics. All of their records are carefully remastered and cut to the highest standards to make sure the pressings are of peak audio quality and do justice to the music being released. And something else to note is that they don't do limited runs to drive up resale and hype. If the demand is there, they'll repress, as the focus is the music, not the profit margin. They have flat rate shipping and free UK shipping on orders over £60. And if you head to bewithrecords.com and use the discount code ONCEADJ, all one word, you'll get 10% off your order. So head to bewithrecords.com and level up those crates today.
Anymore. So that's when, very soon after that, I went back to my job. And then very soon after that, I got the gig on XFM, and then I drastically changed, careers and went into the music industry, and I was about 29 at the time.
Just one more thing I was going to ask you about XFM, because we've talked about one elusive character in Banksy. Carl Pilkington, did you ever have anything to do with him at XFM?
Oh, good question. I did, yeah. Carl was the head of sound. He was the head of station sound. So he was the head producer at XFM. And Carl, whenever I do pre-recorded interviews, there was a good mate of mine, Chris Denman, and Carl Pilkington. So Carl Pilkington was the head of station sound. He was the station producer, essentially. All the XFM audio identity was him. The broadcasts, the recording sessions, it was either him or Chris. Chris went on to be the producer of the XFM show. But Carl was quite often, I'd be in sessions with Carl, and he'd be recording my session. So I'd be interviewing Chuck D, and I'd be face to face with Chuck D, but Carl was behind the glass running the board and recording the session. And I knew Carl really, really well. And I was there when Ricky and Steve came back on XFM. I was there when The Office, before The Office had even started, was a thing. I was there when The Office became an immediate cult success. I'd see Ricky and Stephen Merchant at the station. Carl was there, and then that moved really quickly. Ricky and Steve used to do their show on Saturday afternoon, right? So they did it live on a Saturday afternoon, and I used to do my show on a Saturday night. So I'd go in Saturday afternoon, I'd go and buy records in the West End, I'd go to Bongos, all those stores. Then I'd go into XFM, get all the records that had been delivered to me at XFM, take them all home, process everything, get my show ready, then come back into London later on. So I quite often see them on a Saturday afternoon doing the show, recording the show, and I'd see them in the office. and then I'd come back later on. So I was very much there at the whole time. I can even tell you how the Carl Pilkington persona even came about. I mean, Andrew Phillips was the head of the station, basically, said, Ricky and Steve are coming back to the station. They'd obviously got some kind of success. They were on XFM in the early days, before it was acquired by Capital Radio. So they're in the old location. Then they came back and thought it'd be a good thing to do. So it was the Ricky and Steve show. What they needed though, the Ricky and Steve show, they needed someone to run the desk and engineer the show. So they put Carl in there. Andrew Phillips told Carl in no uncertain terms, "You are not allowed to talk on the mic. This is Ricky and Steve show," and told Carl and Ricky, "You're not allowed to bring Carl on the mic." Now that's red rag to a bull to Ricky. So when you hear that, when you listen back to those original shows that became the early podcasts, they were the first podcasts.
Yeah.
And Carl was the genius that monetized those and did a deal with Apple. He left XFM, did a deal with Apple, and they were charging for those podcasts, but then they became free. And there was a couple of very clever people. But those the very, very early podcasting days. So thanks to Ricky Gervais, we're here today. But what happened was Andrew Phillips would say, "Carl, you're not allowed to talk, and you're not allowed to talk to Carl." So they would ask him questions, and he'd be like, "Oh, I don't know, like, Carl, what do you think to this? Oh, yeah, I don't know, whatever." In his dulcet northern tones. And the whole reluctantly talking and reluctantly sharing and reluctantly getting a conversation came from that. It was like Carl was not allowed to talk to them and they were not allowed to talk to Carl. But because Ricky, and as soon as they kind of heard Carl sort of talking and interacting, it just became a joke. It became funny. Carl's reluctance to engage in a conversation, being careful what he said, being careful not to say something that could lose his job or whatever. Even though he's the head of the station sound, he's quite a senior job. He was fairly well protected, but he obviously didn't want to overstep his mark. And that's how it came about. And then it became a thing. And then it was like, look, you're not allowed to talk to Carl. Carl, you're not allowed to talk. And then it would get worse and worse and worse every week. So all those all that stupid shit you would hear him come out with is because he wasn't really allowed to say it. And Ricky would just make so much fun out of him because he couldn't really speak his mind or say too much. And that's that whole dynamic between Ricky, Steve, and Carl that went on for many, many years was born from those kind of early days on XFM. So, answer your question, I knew Carl very well. I haven't spoken to him for a long time. Me and Yoda did a mixtape, I think Unthugged 2 or something, or Unthugged 3. And I asked Carl to do an intro for it. And I emailed him, and he was doing Idiot Abroad. And I think he was in Africa somewhere in a tent. And he recorded it on his phone or whatever and said, "Oh, I'm in a tent recording this. Shout out Dan Greenpeace and DJ Yoda." Again, and that was the last time I spoke to him. I don't think I've spoken to him or seen him since. I asked him to do that drop and that intro for Unplugged 2, I think. Unplugged 2 Electric Boogaloo. So if you listen to that online, you'll hear Carl Pilkington at the beginning of that mixtape.
Nice.
Because I called it a favour. So yeah, anyway, that was a whole thing. That happened.
Yeah, because I still listen to them now on almost a daily basis. Yeah. It's just, there's nothing like it. So I'm not going to ask you questions about Carl for another half an hour, don't worry. But was he told not to go on the mic because people knew what he was like and that he was a bit different? Like, why was it so much like Carl can't go on?
No one knew who Carl was. Carl was the station producer. Carl wasn't a presenter on the station. I was a presenter. Zane was a presenter. Lauren Laverne was a presenter. There was this, Ricky and Steve were presenters. There was this incredible era of presenters that it was almost like the early Six Music. So Zane went on to Radio 1 and went on to huge things. But a lot of those people who were on the station at the time went on to be the early presenters for Six Music when XFM eventually imploded. That was one of my regrets. Why didn't I go to Six? Why didn't I go to One Extra? Why did I stay on too long? By the time I was trying to rescue my career, it was too late. I was chasing my tail. I'd missed the boat. But a lot of those incredible talents from XFM went on to BBC. But no one knew who Carl was. Carl wasn't a presenter. He wasn't on the mic. He was the head of the station sound and did an incredible job and was very, very talented. But yeah, so when, to answer your question, he wasn't even a personality. He wasn't even someone that was like, "Oh, it's Carl in the office. All right, geezer." He wasn't even that, He was doing sessions. Coldplay were coming into XFM, Kasabian, Kings of Leon, The Killers, all these incredible rock bands in that golden era of like 2004, 2003 to 2007, this incredible golden era of like indie and this new wave of sort of like indie, the Arctic Monkeys, they were coming in doing sessions at XFM daily. Chris Martin, was going out with one of the girls in the XFM office. Yellow was written about her. That those maybe divulging too much there, but anyway, though it was a golden era of like indie, and I was this hip hop kid in the middle of it all, and I had everything I wanted, any artist I want, because the pluggers, the radio pluggers that were plugging the records, they were like, right, they'll go and do Westwood. We'll get them a mainstream Radio 1 appearance, and we'd do XFM with Dan Greenpeace. It ticked the box. So a lot of these hip hop artists, so let's say, Capitol Records were in Dilated Peoples. No one really knew how to work Dilated Peoples at a major label. But one thing's for sure, not even Westwood wanted Dilated Peoples. One thing's for sure, Dan Greenpeace was going to take Dilated Peoples. So I was a big tick in the box for those radio pluggers at the time. We ticked the XFM box. That's cool. That's credibility. Even when Zayn went to Radio 1, he told me that in their playlist meetings, they want to know what hip-hop records they played. So they'd look at my playlist that I'd send out on a weekly basis as to what Dan was playing on XFM and choose the next underground hip-hop record or the big up-and-coming hip-hop record. I remember going on Lauren Laverne's show each week and doing my, Dan Greenpeace hip hop segment. I'd go in on a morning on, no, it wasn't Lauren Laverne, it was Zoe Ball. Zoe Ball was on XFM. So she'd bring me on and she'd say, what's your hip hop record of the week? And it was like, I remember one time it was Hey Ya by Outkast. No one had heard Hey Ya by Outkast. I could have played an underground up and coming artist. I could have played a Dilated or anything on Raucous or whatever it may be. But that record dropped and I was like, this is incredible. This is so different. I'm going to play this. So I think I gave Hey Ya by Outkast the first ever UK radio play. And she was like, wow, this is interesting. And it's like, and we had these incredible moments where I got this incredible, opportunities to like go on the mainstream side of the station as well and expose hip hop records.
Well, I think even with just the sort of packaging and the title of the Unthugged mixes, like it's something that just instantly makes hip hop a lot more accessible, and kind of just calling it that kind of removes any sort of like perception boundaries that certain people might have. Yeah. So that's pretty like sort of clever in itself.
We got some, we did probably one of only 5, maybe even 3 hip hop mixes on the Essential Mix on Pete Tong. Me and Yoda. Yeah, I think Yoda did another Essential Mix. I think DJ Shadow did an Essential Mix. And I saw Pete Tong recently in Dubai, came over for business, and I said to him, you probably don't remember me, but I'm Dan Greenpeace, and I used to be on XFM, and I did an Essential Mix. I totally remember you. We had a bit of a chat. And again, another weird full circle moment. But that, doing the Essential Mix was a big door opener for me and Yoda as well. We then bootlegged that mix and put it out ourselves or through another guy. God knows how many CDs he sold. We probably got $1,000 each. He probably sold 20,000 CDs. But, these crazy, crazy shit. It was a crazy time. It really was. Looking back at it, it was groundbreaking times, whether it's Ricky or Steve or what. And then when I was on, just before I joined XFM, I was pretty cool with Westwood, and Westwood was like a kind of an icon, absolute icon, from Bad Meaning Good documentary 1987, exposing the London posse and all that kind of stuff. It was like legendary. And we'd get second and third hand copies of his tapes and his shows and hearing Ultramagnetic MC's tracks for the first time. But in some weird roundabout way, through my Independence Day days for Hip Hop Connection, and being known as a DJ, he asked me to come on and do an Independence mix. And that first show that I did, I hadn't quite started on XFM yet, but I knew it was coming. I knew we'd had the meetings. So I went on his show, and I had all these, because when I was interviewing artists, I always get them to do artist drops. So I had this incredible bank of artist shout-outs that I'd acquired before I was on radio, but for my mixtapes. So I went on into Radio 1 and I did the guest mix, and I was dropping incredible drops that I was getting from Busta Rhymes or whoever. And it's almost like my little segment sounded so professional because I was so ready to go to radio from my pirate radio days, but from doing mixtapes and knowing how to compile music. I was so ready for that radio opportunity. It was incredible. And the Westwood, when I appeared on Westwood, Eminem, that was the first time Eminem went on Westwood show. And of course I was good. I knew Eminem and his manager, Paul Rosenberg. And so when they were in the studio, it was a big deal. And it was almost like I was on Westwood. I was doing this independent mix. Eminem was on the show. We all kind of knew each other. And that was just before I started on XFM. So by the time I started on XFM, I was hitting the ground running. I did Eminem's first ever radio interview. So Zayn did his first TV interview for MTV. In fact, Paul Rosenberg said to me, we're going to do one radio interview. We're going to do one TV interview. So I interviewed Eminem. I went to Manchester to one of his shows in Manchester backstage, and there's YouTube footage of me interviewing Eminem backstage. And I interviewed Eminem, broadcast it on XFM, and Paul said, who should we get to do the radio interview today? It's got to be Zayn on MTV. So we went back down to London. He did Zayn on MTV. So there's a weird video online. It's a 45 King video talking about the origins of 45 King working on Stand for Eminem. And the 2 interview clips they used was me interviewing Eminem in Manchester, pre-recorded for my XFM show, and Zayn interviewing Eminem for the MTV. So we were the first 2 people to interview him. And this was the second or third week I've been on XFM. I was interviewing Eminem, and I got all the presenters from XFM drops. So I got him to record drops, Eminem to draw drops for all the XFM presenters. So within 3 or 4 weeks, I was making my mark like nobody's business. I was like the hero. I was the hero of the station, the hottest rapper at the time, the hottest artist on the planet. I got the first ever radio interview, getting everyone drops. It was a wild time, you know. And then very soon I left my job and went to music full time. And then I actually got a job with a record label out of Boston called Landspeed Distribution, which is the precursor to Traffic Entertainment and Get On Down, which you may not know, do a lot of hip hop reissues. So that was the turning point. Because of my work in music and as a journalist and a DJ, they approached me and said, we need someone to handle our UK business. We've got a UK distribution deal through PS, Play It Again Sam, and we need someone to handle all our UK marketing and distribution. And they offered me a salary, and it was the same salary as I was getting my job. So it was an immediate transition. I was on radio. I got a job running this US record label. Bang, that was it. I was gone. So by the time I turned 30, I was like, right, that was the turning point. I'm fully knee deep. I'm up to my neck in this business and culture now. This is it. This is the turning point.
Because didn't Ugly Duckling, some of their stuff came out on Pius, didn't it?
They did. That was after. So we signed it to Wall of Sound, and then Ugly Duckling. PS had their own record label as well, and so it kind of switched from being on Bad Magic. Bad Magic kind of folded and stopped being a thing, and then they switched to PS, and then I think they actually went to XL Records for a little stint as well. But XL was distributed through PS, so it all went through the same. All went through the same system. So, you know, pretty crazy stuff, man. You know, it was exciting times. You know, that whole time was very, very exciting. I was right in the thick of it. You know, and then clubs like Fabric emerged, and I really started cutting my teeth in proper clubs with proper sound, in proper rooms with big DJs. You know, I'd do my own hip hop nights at 93 Feet East. It was we had the All See Live, we called it. And there was a promoter who worked with XFM called Adrian, who gave me a budget, and he goes, look, you know, you've got $5,000 to spend, you know, book artists for me. I'll fly them in, you know, and I brought in Core Mega, Large Professor, Non-Fiction, local artists. I brought Black Twang, so I brought, you know, signed Black Twang to Bad Magic, Estelle, High and Mighty. I've got the flyers somewhere. There's millions of them, but and that was my entry point into booking, not only DJing, being a journalist, running a record label, being A&R, being a radio presenter, but booking talent, so booking artists. I wasn't taking the risk. I wasn't putting my money in it. And here I am in 2025, promoting shows, booking the biggest names in entertainment, again, full circle. But I cut my teeth in mid to late 90s booking hip-hop DJs and negotiating fees and, you know, we'll pay for your flight, we won't pay your flight, we'll give you $3,000, $2,000, they want $5,000, we'll give you $2,000. I was negotiating with with my heroes. I was negotiating with, like, trying to do a deal with Large Professor to come over, and then Large Professor would come over, and then me and Yoda went in the studio with him and recorded the worst hip hop track of all time, mainly due to our production for Unfuck the album. But, you know, I'd bring in Large Professor to DJ, and we'd pay him an extra $1,000 and he'd do a track for me and Yoda for our Unfucked album. Roll on 25 years later, maybe 30 years later, I'm bringing Diamond D to Dubai to DJ, and I'm saying, while you're here, do you want to jump on a track? And he's like, play me some beats. I'm like, funnily enough, here's some beats I prepared earlier, because during COVID, I'd fuck all else to do, so I started making beats. So I'm doing the same thing 30 years later, gone full circle moment. It was, some of the shit that's happened in my career and life is crazy how cyclical it is and how full circle it goes. It never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, and you were Sway's manager for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I was. So basically that really kicked in. I met Sway. All right, so I was on radio. Me, Shorty Blitz and Semtex got flown to Atlanta to cover TVT Records. I had All City Music because Landspeed Distribution went bust. Trying to type a few stories here. Landspeed Distribution put out 50 Cent's first album, Guess Who's Back? Not first album, but the one that kind of got him the one that's holding the gun on the cover. I was distributing and handling all the marketing distribution for that label. Then he got signed to Shady Aftermath because Landspeed Distribution's office is right next to Theo Sedlmeyer's office, which was Eminem's management and lawyers. So Landspeed would take CDs and they'd be checking out CDs from Landspeed, vice versa. Anyway, they ended up signing 50 Cent. Landspeed kept on selling the CDs. I was doing my job, kept on selling the CDs. Universal ended up putting a cease and desist on Landspeed Distribution. Don't put any more CDs out, it's signed to the Universal. So Landspeed folded. Out of Landspeed folding and going bankrupt, PS, who I was running Landspeed for, said to me, well, Landspeed's gone, you're doing a great job, why don't we give you your own distribution deal? So they gave me my own pan-European distribution deal. I didn't know how to run a record label. I didn't know how to do anything. I knew how to A&R, I knew to sign artists, I knew to discover talent, I knew how to run a record label. But they gave me a record label, and I was then, this is pre-download days, this is pre-Napster, or whatever it was. We were selling so many CDs, I can't even tell you, and making £5 a CD, whereas now you're getting pennies for streaming. We were still selling CDs. We could sell 10,000 CDs with not on a single scrap of marketing and sell 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100,000 CDs, making a lot of money. Anyway, I had this distribution deal. I had All City Music, the show. I had All City Music, the record label. I had the All City show. I had All City Live. Didn't really know what I was doing in anything apart from radio. I was pretty proficient at. And I had this record label, right? So I'm like, I signed Black Twang. I really want to sign a UK artist. And I was signing the Arsonists and Non-Fiction and Alchemist's first album, First Infantry, Mobb Deep's Free Agents album. I was doing all these deals, distributing all these amazing, incredible music. And then I thought I want to sign a British artist. So I went to Atlanta with Shorty Bliss at Semtex. And I was at it was a crazy trip. We went to interview the Yin Yang Twins, Lil Jon. We were in Outcast Studios. We were hitting strip clubs. We were like doing wild shit in Atlanta, hanging out with Ludacris, then Lil Jon, then the Yin Yang Twins, and then being in the strip club with all of them and drinking and Pitbull and crazy shit. Anyway, it was a wild trip. And we were at the airport coming back, and I said to Shorty as we got back to the airport, I'm like, I want to sign a UK artist. Like, who do you think I should sign? I want to work with a UK artist, or do a deal with or work with a distribute a UK artist. And he goes, Sway, he's brilliant. I'm like, yeah, I've heard of Sway. I heard his mixtape. And I'd heard his mixtape. And so that was it. I got back within about 2-3 days. I reached out to Sway. I think Semtex connected me and Sway. Semtex had done great things with Dizzy Rascal and the whole thing, and was, I think it was a Sony Music, or maybe you'd moved to Universal Music by that point. So Semtex kind of gave me the cosign. He was like, yeah, Dan's cool. Dan does his thing. He's the real deal. And so because Semtex gave me the cosign again, which I'm grateful to, and lost touch with Semtex, I'd love to get back in touch with him, but gave me the cosign, set up a meeting. Sway came to XFM to meet me in the lobby of XFM. And you could tell he's kind of sussing me out. He's kind of guarded and, who's this guy? And I've heard of him. He's on radio, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he came on the show with Pirelli and all the boys. We did a session on the show. And then we struck up a deal, and I ended up doing a distribution deal with Decipher Productions, which was Sway's label, putting it through All City Music, ultimately through PS. And we put out, This Is My Demo. And I was there for most of the recording of that, working with DJ Turkish. And we put out this groundbreaking album, which was nominated for a Mercury Prize. And it was the first kind of label services deal PS had done. They'd gone from just being a distributor, taking a small percentage and distributing your record, to giving you marketing spend, an advertising budget and a marketing budget, and money for radio pluggers and TV pluggers. So it's like a services deal. So they took 25% of the pot in return for putting money into your project. So, and then we were performing live on the Mobos. We were at the Mercury Awards. It was wild. It went really, really quickly. It moved really, really quickly. So yeah, and then I was kind of his label, his distributor, JV kind of label deal in place with All City Music and Decipher Productions. So if you look at the back of those CDs, it's All City Music, Decipher Productions. I actually put a manager in place for him, who was a good manager. He works with he still works this day with a very famous DJ. I won't name names, but anyway, I got Sway a manager. I thought it's better that I keep my distance. Let me be the label, the distributor, and you have a manager. Anyway, eventually, first album came out, and him and the manager parted ways. We'd had a successful album. He was recording his second album, and we said, why don't I just become your manager? And the label is Decipher Productions. I'll handle the distribution, but I'll take sort of All City off it, and I'll become your manager and distributor. So kind of the dynamic changed a bit. But yeah, I went on to work with him for many years. Man, Adam, that's a whole other story. That's a big old chapter, that one. But I then stopped at XFM, so I stopped doing radio. So almost like the buffer for me for losing radio was then getting into record label and the management side, which then took over the next few years. And a good chunk of my life and my time, I put, it was all about managing Sway. I was still DJing. I wasn't doing any radio. I was doing a lot of voiceover, so I did a lot of voiceover work.
Right.
So I did a lot of adverts and radio, and I was still very much in radio doing voiceover, and I still do voiceover out to this day in Dubai, actually.
Have you got any voiceover highlights?
I do like Eminem's album came out. I do any hip hop albums that came out. I'd be the voice. They'd get someone from One Extra or from XFM. It depends what demographic they're marketing to.
Yeah.
But I always had a pretty good face for radio, as they say. So yeah, I did voiceover work, but I was DJing. I was still writing, maybe. I was doing mixtapes. I still do stuff with Yoda. I had other stuff on my label, but that became less and less. Sway became the main concern. Yeah, managed Sway, toured with him, was his DJ once in a while, was his tour manager, went to meetings. We're always trying to chase that elusive Radio 1 playlist, or that Radio 1 A-list. And this was before streaming times. So it was a very, very difficult period of my life, but I learned a lot about talent management. Again, comes into what I do now. I learned a lot about talent management, about managing, about how artists tick, how artists work, what they need. And again, now I'm booking some of the biggest artists in the world and bringing some of the biggest artists in the world and have done for many years to the Middle East. I know how to operate. I know how to deal with the agents. I know how to deal with management. I know how to deal with the artists. I understand talent. I am a DJ. You could call me talent in my own right, but, I never really put myself on that pedestal. I was never that accomplished as an artist or a DJ. But I know how to deal in that world and maneuver in that world. So yeah, I learned a lot from Sway. We eventually did get his Radio 1 A-list. I eventually did a deal with 3 Beat Records, which was distributed through Universal Music, with John at 3 Beat and the team there. And they were an incredibly accomplished dance music label. They put out, Barbra Streisand and some big dance hits, big crossover dance hits. They were very, very successful. And I signed Sway. In fact, Skepta was signed to them in the early days as well. I signed Sway. We eventually got with Level Up and Still Speeding with Kano. We eventually got his Radio 1 playlist. I think Level Up with Flux Pavilion charted top 5. So it got to the point where I eventually got him that elusive Radio 1 A-list. But by that point, I was battered. Dude, I was battered by the whole process of managing, giving up my life for an artist, dealing with the politics of Radio 1. I was on the other side of the fence. I wasn't a presenter anymore. I was dealing with pluggers who were trying to push my artist to Radio 1. And it was very, very difficult. It was stressful, every week. The playlist meetings, Radio 1, the plugger going back, sorry they haven't taken it. Sorry, they added Tinchy Strider's record instead of yours. Whatever it may be, It was incredibly stressful and hard work, and it was a grind. It was really, really, really tough. But it toughened me up. It made me kind of, a part of what I do now is very thankful to that process I went through, But eventually got him the playlist, got him the hit record. He had a very successful year touring after that. The most successful year of his career, club shows, touring up and down the country, overseas shows. And, I felt like, the relationship was getting a bit tense. By in a weird twist of fate, at that point, I had a residency at a club in Belfast called Thompson's. So I was still DJing quite a bit. And Jaguar Skills was a resident there. I bring Zane Lowe with me. We'd DJ there. And I was doing a lot of university. I was touring a lot with Yoda and Zane. So when Zane did these University Freshers Week tours, things like that, Zane would take me or the next men as support DJs. So I was watching Zane, who was a fucking phenomenal talent. As a DJ, as a radio presenter, as a creative in an interview, he still remains one of my biggest idols, peers, influences, inspirations. But I was watching him DJ, and when I was doing the early days of XFM, watching him present, and I'm learning so much from this guy, how to DJ, how to present. I learned a lot from him. So, me and Zane would go to Thompson's in Belfast and, once a month, or I'd DJ and do my hip hop set. And anyway, the owner of that club had a friend in Dubai. And I got a call from Steve who ran that club, Steve and Marco and Belfast at Thompson's, said, I've got a mate in Dubai who needs a hip hop DJ and you need to get a plane in 24 hours. And I put your name forward, would you be up for it? I'd never been to Dubai at that point in my life. Maybe transited once through on the way to India or something, but anyway. I was like, fuck it, let's go. So this was 2006, flew in, did the gig, met some friends who I still know to this day, but I was looking around Dubai thinking, this is nuts. The Burj Khalifa wasn't quite finished. The Palm wasn't quite finished. All these landmarks you know about Dubai now were being built, but they weren't quite done yet. And I thought, I'm DJing this club, I'm playing hip hop, I'm smashing it with this crowd. I'm getting on the mic. I'm kind of almost like reinvented myself as a DJ. I didn't usually play those hip hop R&B clubs, but kind of like, fuck it, I'm going to go for it. Got on the mic, make some fucking noise, dropping bombs over the tracks and, destroyed it, right? And then they asked me to come back again and again and again. So I'd kind of started working in Dubai a little bit and going back and forth. And then eventually they started saying to me, look, man, we don't really know how to book artists, any major DJs. Can you help us? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, by that point, I'd been in the entertainment industry for a good 10 years. I knew agents at WME or CAA. I knew PR, I knew publicists, I knew artist managers, I knew DJs, I knew artists at a high level. I knew a high level of artists by that point. So I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll call in some favors. So I booked Groove Armada. I booked Basement Jacks. I booked Trevor Nelson. I booked Yoda. I booked my mates, Yoda, Zane. Then they wanted some indie rock stuff. I booked Carl Barrett from Libertines, to do a set. And I started booking talent, properly. And it's not that it was alien to me. I'd done it before, as I said, in my All City show days. So then I started not only becoming a DJ, but I started brokering talent deals for these clubs in Dubai, still managing Sway. And then when it eventually came to a natural end, again, the Sway chapter is a whole different chapter. It's way deeper than I can possibly go into right now. But we grew apart. But I kind of already set up this life in Dubai. So I kind of we ended up parting ways. I carried on working from London in my home booking talent remotely for the clubs in Dubai. But when we did events, I'd fly in for the shows as well. So I'd fly to Dubai if I booked the Killers or Armand Van Helden or Fatboy Slim or whatever. I'd fly into Dubai for those shows and make sure the show goes okay, make sure the artist was okay, make sure the agent got a good report, make sure the manager was happy, make sure they got paid. So I kind of transitioned from DJing to booking DJ, and that's when I really started becoming like a pretty major talent booker. I was spending millions and millions and millions of dollars for my clients in Dubai, booking big names, and they were getting bigger and bigger. So yeah, I very soon, you know, I decided to make the transition. We decided as a family, look, you know, we stay in London, or I've already sort of set up a business in Dubai. We moved to Dubai and give it a shot. So I didn't really have any ties. My record label didn't exist anymore. I wasn't managing Sway. I wasn't on the radio. I wasn't DJing as much. But I had this kind of opportunity in Dubai. So we made the transition, you know, and packed up the entire house, my entire record collection. We had one kid by then. We had two kids. One was on the way. And we moved. We rented our house out in London and we moved. Not really a job to go to, just some sort of semblance of a business, you know?
It sounds quite like serendipitous.
Very much so. Very much so. And that was 10 years ago, man. You know, here I am now, you know, 10 years later, and these incredible full circle moments still happening. I'm working with artists that, you know, I've got Dizzy Rascal performing next month in Dubai. I've seen Dizzy Rascal for years. You know, he was like on the circuit with me and Sway, and, you know, we did some big shit. And, you know, the early days moving over here, I was booking a lot of artists for a festival called Sundance at Atlantis de Palm. Very famous hotel. They had a big stretch of beach, which held about 15,000 people. So Atlantis opened in Dubai, and the guy said to me, look, we love what you're doing in that club down the road, and you're booking Groove Armada and Basement Jacks, but we wanted to replicate that on the beach and create a festival. So we created a festival called Sundance with my friends, Tim and Greg at the time. And that lasted about 4 or 5 years, booked major artists, you know, Florence the Machine. I could go to Florence the Machine. The Machine from Florence the Machine used to run my record label. She was like my little buddy. She ran my business. I was going to put out Florence the Machine's first EP. They were called Floribel and Miserabella on All City Music. Again, got a cease and desist from Universal. Florence has just signed to Universal. She's got a new management company. You can't put it out. I've still got that. I've still got the original masters. I've got the artwork. But anyway, that's another story. But roll on 10 years time, Florence the Machine's one of the biggest artists in the world. So I call Isabella. Hey, I want to book Florence. Who's the agent? Emma Banks, CAA. Great. Hey, Emma. Florence, Isabella's a friend of mine. I booked Florence the Machine. You know, so some of those connections kind of helped me. I booked Ed Sheeran in 2015 for his first Middle East tour. I met Ed on the photo shoot of one of Sway's tracks. We shot the video in London. Sway was recording with Ed. Ed was staying at Sway's house and doing tracks and demos. They recorded maybe 7 or 8 tracks. Turn at the video shoot. Ed's first album's out. He's not a massive name, but he's certainly a name. Ed turns up to the video shoot with Harry Styles. A young Harry Styles. Like One Direction Harry Styles, but doing the world tour, becoming insane level Harry Styles.
Yeah.
So I'm at the video, there's a photo on my Instagram with me, Sway, Ed and Harry. And Ed was like, hey, good to see you, Dan, because I'd known him from being around Sway. He's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm about to move to Dubai, booking loads of shows out there. And he goes, oh, well, I'm ready to do my first Middle East show. Count me in, like, just give me a call. So true to his word, when Sundance, the festival came to an end, we started promoting our own shows with our partners. You know, first person I called is Ed, called his agent, did the deal, brought him over for Dubai, Oman, Qatar, India, did a whole Middle East tour, an India tour with Ed Sheeran in 2015, just because he gave me his word that he would do it. And true to his word, he did it, and he came over and did the show. So I was really at that point going into a whole different world of becoming a major concert promoter, major talent booker for sure. Wasn't putting my own money down just yet, but that came over the years, and you know, then we started taking risk and doing our own shows. So, but you know, the way it's all come full circle is pretty insane. For my early corporate career with Sony and being on the Sony Street team, pushing Nas and Fuji's albums and interviewing Nas on radio, and then suddenly here we are, like all these years later. You know, everything I've done in life is kind of, you know, come back full circle. But, you know, the podcast called Once a DJ. I'm still very much a DJ. I've got my love back for DJing. There's the venue in Dubai called Honeycomb Hi-Fi, like a vinyl bar. You know, these vinyl bars are very trendy. One open in Dubai. Devon Oja sound system. And a couple of years ago, I just really got my mojo back. I stopped DJing for years and years and years, but still digging and collecting and not doing radio, not really DJing. But since I've started playing vinyl again, back in the game, man. Back in the game. Like, I'm digging in this collection every week, you know, still buying vinyl. Records come every day. I started playing 45s for a long time because it was a good format for me to use. I wanted the aesthetic of DJing with vinyl, but to schlep all these kind of 12 inches in all these record bags, and I'm trying to do a 4-hour set, is pretty difficult. So yeah, you know, got back into DJing, massively into DJing, bring a lot of DJ I brought, and I'm having fun again. So I'm either booking talent at this level, very high level, or promoting, or I'm grassroots, you know, brought DJ Jim Sharp over a few weeks ago, Sticky Doja, Diamond D, Stretch Armstrong, you know, DJ Coco, DJ fucking Coco, man, like, changed the game. Like, for me, it was like, I brought, you know, and I was giving him his first gigs out of Japan. No one's really bringing him anywhere. I knew of him from his mixtapes and his hip hop days, but when I started bringing DJ Coco out, there was like 50 people turning up. I was paying for his flights from Japan on my own money, paying for the club, paying for his hotels, losing money. But I was so in awe of the mastery and the craft and the art and the skill. Blew my mind, man. Blew my mind. And so I got the mojo back for like bringing the artists that I love out. So I was either booking Ed Sheeran or DJ Coco, you know. And, you know, just got the love back for bringing talent out, new talent, DJs, DJing with talent. It always helps when you bring in artists who's a DJ who can be a rapper as well. So I brought Diamond D out. We did a track together. There's a few more on my hit list that I need to bring out that can rap as well. Notable producer/DJs. There might be another full circle Large Professor moment.
Nice.
You never know. But, you know, I just got my mojo back for it, and I've got this new sort of lease of life with the DJing, and I love it. Go out every couple of weeks. My time is limited, and I'm so busy. I'm traveling around the region. I've got a family and kids, and you know, and it's difficult to balance all that. But I have to crowbar that creative time in for me. It has, you know, there's something for me again, right? I've got my creative mojo back.
Yeah, and I think it's the catharsis of it. You know, it's just a thing you've got to release, I think, sometimes, or it is for me anyway. Even if I'm just like tinkering with my decks in here, it's just I just need that. You know.
No, it's been incredible, man. And doing the track with Diamond, again, soft plug, available on all streaming platforms now. It was like I'd learned so much about putting out other artists, promoting, marketing, designing the album covers, designing graphic design, whatever. So when I did the Diamond D record, I'm like, right, everything I've learned about putting a record out, I've done for everybody else apart from me. So I'm going in, right? I'm like, I reached out to Kenny Dope, sending the track, Kenny Dope, so it goes, I want to press it up. He's got a pressing plant in his crib. I'm like, wow. I don't want any money for it, just press it, Kenny. And I want it to look like a test pressing. And he's like, I love test pressings. I get this whole deep chat about we're sending pictures on WhatsApp to each other of test pressings. We've got rare test pressings. Kenny Dope, absolute legend, man. And he's loving my record. He puts it out. I handle the digital distribution. I pay so much attention to the design and the artwork. At KCD, my guy I use in Japan for my artwork, I used him. Did all his motion graphics. I'm like, I put so much effort into this release that I've been waiting almost my entire life to put out. I put my first record out. I'm in full control of it. And I've got 3.5 decades of experience of marketing, promoting, managing talent, but the talent's me for once. It's like about me now, you know? So I enjoyed it immensely, man. I made promo jackets. I made promo t-shirts. I made stickers. I pressed 45s. You know, it's on iTunes. I got remixes. I got Theo. I got DJ Design. I got Kish and Turkish to do a remix. I did a whole remix package. I went in so hard on that, and I needed it. It was almost like I've done everything for everyone else apart from me. Yeah. My entire career on the business side. Now it's time for me. And I'm going to surprise people by like, Dan makes beats. So people know I produce, because if you read the book and you know I produced for Drew. Some people from my older days knew that I produced records, but I hadn't touched a sampler in 30 years.
So if we could get in a time machine now and go back to, say, 1997, you're on the radio, Dan Greenpeace, XFM, and you wanted to big up a track, but you wanted to big up your track. Can you kind of do what you would have done at the time?
I'm not sure I could do it. I'll tell you what I would do. Not what I would say, what I would do. The big records were always at the beginning of the show. So I don't know if you ever listened to the All City show, but I had this intro where I sampled the Avengers or a KPM library record, and it was like all these drops, and it was like this crazy like montage of drops and energy. And then I'd have this instant replay machine, this was before Serato, where I'd play my explosions and drops and the sound effects. So the big record would go at the beginning of the show. So we come out the show opener, you come out the ad break, there's the show opener, you drop the big record that week, I'd play, you know, sound effects, and I'd probably rewind it and play it again. And so that big show opener was like the big impact. If you're listening to the show, the record I play first is the big track. So of course, if I'm going to plug myself, I'm going to put that at the biggest track. So I'm going to put it at the pole position right at the top of the show. So that's how I kind of gave treatment to the biggest song. And I'd phase the show. We'd usually do a 3-hour All City show. So then I'd break after half an hour. And then at the top of the second hour or third hour, I'd go and play some big heavy hitters as well. So that's kind of what I'd do. I'd give you that treatment, you know.
Nice.
But then I'm pretty humble as well. So I'd almost be a little bit too humble and embarrassed to do that to my own record. That's what in my mind I'm doing. In reality, it would be buried in amongst the rest. Oh, by the way, this is my new record. Enjoy, you know, with Diamond D. So the reality was I'd be too shy, too embarrassed to and that's probably the reason why I'm not, you know, like Yoda is cut out for being, you know, he's made a career out of DJing. I was never really comfortable standing in front of crowds, really. I was never natural. I was never a natural performer. I reiterate, I had a very good face for radio. I was born and built, and I was meant for radio, you know. I wasn't meant to be a DJ for a crowd. I'll give you one example. When I used to do Sundance Festival at Atlantis, one of the DJs backed out, and 15,000 people on the beach. You got Snow Patrol, Calvin Harris. I bought Snow Patrol, Calvin Harris. It was this immense festival lineup, 15,000 people. There's a prime time slot. DJ pulls out the day before. I'm like, shit, who are we going to put in? My guys were like, Dan, you DJ? I'm like, yeah, fuck it. And I went on that stage, right? I quickly got my friend to do some motion graphics because we had this huge screen on stage. It was like a massive stage, festival stage. I said, here's my face. It was a caricature of me by Jamie Hewlett, actually. He did a campaign for XFM. He did caricatures in a guerrilla style of all the presenters on XFM. So I had this Jamie Hewlett face of mine. I said, right, make some graphics. Dan Greenpeace, my Jamie Hewlett face. Give me a 1 hour reel that I can give to the AV guy and put it on the stage. I did this set. It was kind of like, I played this kind of Major Lazer, Pon the Floor, all those big, you know, Barbra Streisand, all those big kind of crossover hip-hop influence, but big crossover dance tracks, big club festival bangers, not house, not dance, but just kind of crossover hip-hop-y style, you know, Fatboy Slim type thing. I was on the mic, 15,000 people, throw your fucking hands in the air, Dan Greenpeace on the thing. And I got off the stage and I'm like, what the fuck am I doing? That's not me. That is not me. I can do it. I can do it. I've got the confidence, the ability. I can put that mask on and go, hey, I'm not Dan Greenpeace, I'm Dan Greenpeace. But it wasn't me, man. It wasn't me. I walked off that stage, I'm like, everyone goes, oh, you smashed it, you should DJ more. I'm like, nah, I'm not cut out for that. I did it, but I'm not cut out for it. Let me just show you something quickly. I'm just going to show you this picture. One sec. This is the XFM picture. So there's Zane, Theo, Touche, Fake Blood, and me.
Is that the guy that did the gorillas?
Yeah.
Right.
So the gorillas were the hottest thing at the time. And Charlotte Suson, who's the marketing director of XFM at the time, was like, we're kind of relaunching XFM. We've got these exciting new presenters. There's Dan, there's Zane, there's Lauren, there's whoever it is. They did a full, I'm not even joking, a full London Underground tube poster campaign for XFM. So that was on Billboard. That was on Billboard size, like, posters in Oxford Circus.
Wow.
And also on the little smaller ones in the train. So I'm getting in the train thinking, what the fuck? Like, there's me on this poster in Oxford Circus. I was like, it was mental. It was like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing, you know? And that was a little memento I had. You know, they gave us all a poster and, you know, and there it is. The reality of that picture, I look like one of the Proclaimers on that picture. Zane looks like he's like evil B-boy. Theo's like ghetto blaster, the whole thing, you know. And when Charlotte said, I want to take a photo of you, she didn't tell me what the photo was for. So we're in the XFM office, she goes, I want to take a photo. So, okay, cool. She goes, just stand there and pose. I'm just like that. She didn't tell me Jamie Hewlett was going to doing a caricature of me for an entire London Underground poster campaign. Otherwise, I'd have gone.
Yeah.
So I look like me on a normal day. So it always kind of riled me seeing, you know, like Zane's like, and there's me.
I would have been the same in that situation.
I said to Charlotte, you could have told me what were you using it for, like.
So with Dubai, having been there, it's 10 years, right? What's it been like as a resident, seeing how it's changed and developed as a place?
Very interesting. I mean, living here with a family, you know, watching your kids grow up, taking your kids to school, walking the dog. On one hand, it's a very, very normal life. I do the school drop-off. I go to the office. Sometimes I DJ. Sometimes I'm working with an A-list pop star. I'm in Saudi Arabia. You know, but my life is mental in one respect, but the day-to-day aspects of life is very normal. You know, we got a lot of British friends. We got a lot of friends from all around the world. We got a very, very mixed group of friends. You never know your next door neighbor's going to be here. But, you know, when it comes to day-to-day life, it's very normal. You know, you drop your kids off at school, you pick them up from school, you go shopping, you go to Costa and buy coffee, you walk the dog, you drive to work. You know, life's extremely normal. But it's like doing that, living on the moon, you know, and I never stop pinching myself when I'm at the Burj Khalifa. Like, I had some family visiting recently. We went to the Burj Khalifa or I take DJs or artists and we'd give them a tour and I look up at the Burj Khalifa and I'm like, holy shit, I live here. Like, that's 20 minutes down the road from my house. That's like in the city. People come in their millions to Dubai to have a holiday. They save up for a year or 2 years. It's like a dream destination. And I live in this holiday destination. Not only is holiday destination, it is the number one most visited place in the world, you know,
right.
as a holiday. You know, it's bizarre, you know, so I live in this kind of weird bubble of a place that either people go, oh, I don't want to go to the Middle East, or my dreams go to Dubai. Whatever your opinion is of this region, you know, it's an aspirational place to come, but we kind of live in this weird bubble. So that's one thing. It has changed a lot. You see, it's very transient. You see we've had a lot of friends that have lived here, then suddenly leave. A lot of friends that suddenly arrive, they become your best friends. Some friends you've got connections with from back in the UK. You might be from the same town. You might be from the same industry. You know, you build these connections with people, but the connections you make are very meaningful because everyone is in Dubai for the same reason. Either they've come to do better for themselves, or they've just come for a change of scenery. They've come to escape. They've come to try something different. You know, everyone's got their own reasons, but everyone is here. It's not like you just jump on a plane and move here. You know, it's a mission. If you're young, free, and single, it's relatively easy. But when you're moving your house and your family, that's a big task, especially when, you know, you've got friends who work for banks here, for example. They may be relocated, so the banks will pay for the flights and the relocation and the removal costs and transporting the dog and the cat and pay the kids' school fees. We moved of our own sort of volition, if you like. We moved because we wanted something different and a change. So we came here. The reason for coming here were our own reasons. You know, we were self-motivated to do something new and to do something different. So you have to make it work. Some people come here as school teachers, come for a couple of years, have a few nice holidays in Bali because it's close by, and then go back to the UK. Some people come here and have to go back for family reasons. Some people come here for a year and stay 10 years, you know. So it's very interesting, the people you meet. Life is very interesting here. It's very different. I know people see what I do through the lens of Instagram, by and large. Oh, Dan's fucking killing it. You've got Diamond D over. If you're a hip hop head, oh, Dan's fucking killing it. He's promoting this artist. Business must be great. Everything's through the lens of Instagram, but that's great. But you know, you just live a normal life, but it's a weird life. It's a bizarre life, it's for sure. You know, you quite often pinch yourself and go, wow. How the hell did we even do this? How did we even make this move in the first place?
Yeah.
I mean, I was 10 years younger, so could I do that now? No way on earth. I won't have the energy. It was incredibly difficult. But back then it felt right and I did it. Yeah, I've seen it change a lot. More skyscrapers have sprung up. After the Ukraine-Russia war, suddenly 600,000 Russians move here. Changed the dynamic enormously in the schools and in day-to-day life. Before that, huge Chinese influx. Then COVID happened. All those people disappear. You know, so it's very transient. But things change a lot. You know, it's an ever-evolving city. Country, United Arab Emirates.
Yeah.
You know, it's and then you see regional changes. So like when I first moved, going to Saudi Arabia wouldn't have even been a consideration. Saudi Arabia was a closed country. It wasn't open for business. We were doing business in Qatar. Then suddenly, several years later, you know, Qatar gets kind of shut off from the rest of the world for political reasons, but Saudi Arabia springs up. So we're working in Qatar one minute, the next minute, there's no Emirates flights going to Qatar. Saudi Arabia is opening. So you see a lot of regional dynamics as well. It's quite interesting you asking me these questions because not many people ask them because I don't really speak to anyone really about living here outside of Dubai. So thanks for asking me these. It's quite interesting to answer them, and it's different to hip hop. But yeah, it's an interesting point. Not only do I ever seen Dubai change, I've seen the entire region change. I could go deeper into the politics and wider regional politics. But, you know, you probably watched the news, listen to the radio. We don't really do that here. It's not like we've got the TV on or you listen to LBC or you're listening to Sky or BBC News. I look at the BBC app once a day. What's going on in the world? Oh, okay. Back to my everyday life. When I go back to the UK, I find that everyone is bombarded by news and the sirens and there's issues and you live in this weird bubble. You know, we're kind of buffered from a lot that goes on in the outside world.
Amazing. It's really interesting to hear about that because it's not somewhere I've ever been. I mean, I'm not very well travelled, to be honest, so it's always good to hear about other places. Dan, I'm really mindful of time now. I know we've both got quite a lot of stuff to do today, so I think it's probably best if we wrap it up there. Thanks for all your time today and all the stories. I've really enjoyed this. It's not felt like the 2 hours that it's been. But But I think, yeah, we should kind of leave it there. Maybe we can have a volume 2 one day, or a revisited, see how things are going.
Yeah, look, thanks, Adam. I really appreciate it. I know it's taken a while for this to come together, and I've heard so many of my friends and peers being interviewed on this podcast, and patiently waiting, when's he going to ask me? But I've got a lot from listening to a lot of people I know on the podcast. I know some of them really, really well, and to hear their stories, there's perspectives I've never heard before. So, hopefully mine will do the same with them. But keep doing what you're doing, man, because it's great, and I'm happy to do a part 2 anytime. Love the podcast, love what you're doing. Very interesting and insightful. So yeah, thank you for having me on the pod anytime.
Great stuff. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Once a DJ. If you'd like to support the show, then head to onceadj.com/support to find out how you can help. If you'd like to get in touch with any feedback or suggestions, email onceadjpodcast@gmail.com. Once a DJ is produced by the good people at Remote Control. If you'd like to find out more about working with them, head to remote-ctrl.co.uk.
That was nice.